Hi everyone. This is an episode of a podcast that my friend Paul and I have been kind of planning and thinking about doing for quite some time now. This podcast and these episodes are not necessarily the regular kind of coding sessions or frameworks, new frameworks or new topics that you would see on my channel. This podcast is more about topics in the tech industry and how it impacts social life and how it impacts us in general. So just heads up for the people that follow us on YouTube or LinkedIn or whatever. We're not going to be doing much coding. We're going to be talking a little bit more about your career, your growth, AI, the tech industry, just hot topics that are going on today and what we think about it. So this is a lot more than just us writing code and showing you how to build an AI model or whatever. This is more around, what we actually think about what's going on and the purposes and meaning of what's going on and some predictions, from our experience. Paul and I, have a combined 50 years of experience, 20 here and 20 there, 25 here, 25 there. See, engineers are bad at math, Paul. Didn't you think? I think we just really suck at math, don't we?
Wasn't it you in the last live stream that said, "Oh, there's this preconception that you've got to be good at math to be a programmer"? We're proof that's not true.
So three things don't ask engineers to do for you: name variables, calculate dates, or do math. It's just bad. It's just so bad. It never works. I don't know why. It's supposed to be the thing we're good at. It's just we're not.
Terrible. Yeah.
So- Okay, so we
We're
have
too
a
dependent on the machine. That's what it
we,
is.
we became part of the machine. We can't get out of it, and speaking of which, like I feel like okay, so the topic for this video, just so everyone understands, we're talking about AI. Is it actually gonna replace software engineers' jobs? And I'm pretty sure some people will just go like, "Oh my God, this topic again." Yeah, you haven't heard our opinion about it. We're actually boots on the ground software engineers building software for enterprise every day. And we try AI, we work with AI, we use AI, and sometimes we kind of try to see whether it can be useful or not in the actual real, like there's a hype, there's a lot of smoke out there, right? But when you bring it to reality, right, you bring it to the ground, is it actually useful? Is AI actually useful? Is it actually gonna, well, first of all, is it useful, but is it also gonna replace, people's jobs? I don't know. Tell me what you think, Paul. Let's start from you. Go ahead.
It's an interesting one. I, I tend to refrain from having sort of just outright opinions either way on something until I kind of see the evidence for it. So when you initially came to me with this kind of subject matter for a stream, I thought, well, what's the kind of most down to earth way of looking at it that doesn't
Hmm.
just come across as pure speculation?
Hmm.
Because
Hmm.
there's a lot of hype out there about what it is and what it isn't,
Hmm.
and I think a lot of people are basically saying, "Oh, it's the end of the world as we know it," on the like real extreme side of it. And then there's other people saying, "Oh, it's just another fad." We got told when, I don't know, Google Assistant Siri came out, it was going to change the world. And what did it
It
do? It
did.
ended up being this thing on our phone that was kind of a buzzword, and we don't really use it. You
Hmm.
know, they've upgraded it now to Gemini, which is the large language model enabled version of it, but it's much the same. Like most people, I would say, probably don't use the AI
Hmm.
features that are
Hmm.
baked into these common products.
Hmm.
So I when I started sort of doing the research on this session, I thought what's probably going to be the most appropriate take on this, and I think the ideal route to take here is to look at it from a pragmatic point of view and basically say, okay, what is the actual evidence that we're looking at?
Hmm.
So we're looking at the guy that's touted as being the father of AI has been working on this problem for 50 years.
Wow.
And we've seen progression, we've seen improvement, and we've seen stuff happen in those 50 years.
Hmm.
So I'm talking about the guy here that invented the idea of a neural net,
Mm.
invented the idea of essentially replicating what we believe is kind of the digital
Emergent.
version.
That's it. That's
I've gone
all.
all
Oh,
French.
this is gonna be forever. You flipped French for a second. Okay.
That's
Are
it,
you
yeah.
are you talking about John McCarthy or who? Who's the father of AI actually?
Ah, so what what's ultimately happened
Mm,
here is that obviously we've replicated this idea of what we see in kind of human brains in terms of brain cells or neurons, and we've tried to replicate that digitally.
mm,
And people don't realize that obviously LLMs are a different beast altogether, right? It's a reasoning engine, it's to some degree, and it can sort of think, but not in the way that we're sort of traditionally familiar with in how we understand the world.
mm, mm,
Um, but taking that sort of context and putting it into, okay, what have we actually done with it so far? What is the real evidence behind it? What we're seeing is that we're seeing progression. We're seeing some industries are being impacted. We're seeing some companies being able to like downscale huge teams, which were, I think, in many cases, were probably over bloated anyway and had too many people, because you end up
mm,
getting into this problem of the too many cooks problem, right? When you throw
mm,
too many people at a problem, the problem doesn't really go away. It just gets
mhm,
bigger, and then
mhm,
it becomes more complicated to solve. And I think
mhm,
that AI is going to help us sort of return back to a normal level that you might expect in a dev team.
mm, mhm,
Um, so certainly, what we're seeing in our industry as technology leaders, we're seeing a lot of places where it's can potentially be useful, but we're also seeing that LLMs in their current form
mm,
are smart. They're intelligent in that they know everything, so they're knowledgeable,
mm,
but they're not really able to kind of reason in the same way that a human does. So
mm,
if you took an average senior engineer and you took the latest and greatest, model from ChatGPT and you put them against each other in an academic environment,
mm,
ChatGPT is probably going to run rings around the senior engineer. But
probably.
when you get into that in industry context, where the senior engineer is put up against ChatGPT actually doing the job,
Mm,
there's a lot of gotchas. There's a lot of this scenario isn't quite perfect. It doesn't really fit, and there's a
mhm,
lot of like, for some reason now you have to do something slightly differently. And whilst I think we've solved the pragmatic issue of solving an issue, I don't
mm,
think we've solved the idea of sort of creative thinking,
right.
um, which is an interesting way of putting it, because creativity and things like content generation,
Mhm,
we've talked about on a few of the other videos that you've done
mhm,
on your channel about how AI is really good at generating things like images and videos and stuff like that, which are really creative problems, and they potentially are having huge impacts on people. Um, the the problem, of course, is that like
mm,
when a programmer is trying to solve a problem, it's a logical problem with a degree of abstract thinking wrapped around it, and it's
mhm,
the abstract nature of the problems that we solve that
mhm,
causes them to be more of a headache for AI, if you know what I mean. It's
mhm,
that um, the idea of kind of, to put it in programming parlance, it's a polymorphic problem. Um, the
mhm.
concept of, I need you to solve this problem for all animals, not just cats.
Yep.
But
Yeah.
I'm asking you a question about cats.
About cats specifically. That's right. That's right.
Yeah, and I think a lot of programmers, when they're trying to solve a problem, are like, okay, I am aware that this problem is about animals. It's not specifically about cats.
Mhm, mhm,
And I don't know, let's say for argument's sake, the problem, if you like, because we're talking very abstract terms here, but the problem is like transport or something.
mhm,
And the AI is like, oh yeah, it's really simple. You just build a cat-sized box and you put lots of cats in it, and then you put that on a back of a truck, and you
mhm,
can cart around as many cats as you want, and it's not an issue. But
Mm-hmm.
of course, the programmer's going, well, that ain't going to work for my mate's horse,
Uh-huh.
and it's like, okay. So, but humans kind of have this sort of innate ability to go, yeah, that doesn't fit.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas AI doesn't really understand that until you explicitly introduce that context. I think where AI is really making inroads at the moment is jobs that I would say probably people don't want to be doing.
Mm-hmm.
So think about like call centers, answering phones. I suspect that most people that call
This is
centers,
definitely gonna go. Yeah, these are
they,
easy hanging fruits, low hanging fruits, right? Mm-hmm.
yeah, but if you think about the nature of the job, I don't know this because I've never actually sat and worked in a call center myself. But if I think about all the times I've called a call center, it's not
Mm-hmm.
because I'm particularly happy about what that company is doing.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Mm-hmm.
usually to say, oh, you've screwed up my bill this month, or, you know, I asked you to do something simple, you didn't do it. Or it's like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm calling the bank, where's this money? I was expecting it to be transferred in, where is it? And it's
Mm-hmm.
it's more of the nature of the call is all complaints.
Mm-hmm.
So I imagine that the sort of person that works in a call center is just dealing with miserable people all day that just want to complain a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And there are going to be a few exceptions. So there's going to be things like, I don't know, booking agents for holidays, right? That's a
Mm-hmm.
really positive thing. So
Yep.
perhaps people do want to answer the phone for that because
Yep.
it's you can have a really good, down to earth, meaningful human connection type conversation and be like, oh yeah, it's going to be great. You're going to see this, you're going to see that. Whereas an AI is going to be more sort of, it's going to feel like
Robotic,
you're talking to a wall.
automated.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's not going to have that warm feel, is it?
Mm-hmm.
So we're aware that with AI that it's kind of there, but there's something missing. We're not quite sure what it is yet,
Mm-hmm.
but it's certainly getting there.
So, so you're mentioning just few things like this is you kind of this is a great kind of overview of really what we're trying to discuss here today because I want to dig deeper into the replacement aspect of it. What does it really actually mean to be replaced by AI? Like we've seen in the past, you talked about the phone operators. I haven't carbon dated, the people that are subscribed and watching this channel, but for those of you who don't know what a phone operator is, it's there was a point in time like today you have to actually dial a number, right, to actually call someone, right? But a phone operator was actually a real job at some point in time. And what the job was, let me kind of show everyone what a phone operator actually used to look like. So this year, let me share the screen here. A phone operator was actually a real job. So you see these ladies sitting here. You would basically pick up the phone, you pick up the phone, and there is no numbers, right? And someone would answer you as soon as you pick up the phone, someone would answer like a human being, and you would tell them, hey, who do you want to call? And I would tell them, oh, I want to call Paul. And they would literally pick up, just unplug and plug the jack or whatever, right, to connect my line to Paul's line. Oh, whatever that is. So that's what this is, and this job is gone forever. It didn't evolve, it's gone, meaning that, you today don't even know that there used to be a human handling this connection between a person and another person. In fact, actually, even phone numbers. Like, do you remember, Paul? Look, like up until very recently, people would remember each other phone numbers. Right now, you're just on my WhatsApp, on my app chat app, name your chat app thing, and you just kind of know someone's kind of Instagram username or whatever, and that's it. You don't even know it off the top. You already have that pre-added, and this is going away too. Like people don't have to remember each other's numbers anymore. I think you should still remember people's numbers for emergencies when you lose your phone, but it's becoming more and more something that people don't use anymore. How often and when was the last time, Paul, you've seen someone um, even talk about phone operators. It's not even something that people talk about unless in a context like this, right?
Yeah, so you talk about job losses, and I think it's the nature of sort of technology in general, isn't it? This isn't like a unique thing to AI in that respect. And the common example I tend to give people, friends and family, when they ask me about this whole great replacement theory that they have that AI is going to take all of our jobs,
Hmm.
is I basically turn around and I say to them, look, there was a time when we used to have thousands of people in fields with a hoe digging trenches to put seeds into to plant corn and potatoes and whatever it was that we needed for the food chain.
Hmm.
And I don't see anybody today going, God, you know what? I really wish I could get out in a field, but some
Hmm.
you know
Hmm.
a tractor driver took my job with a
Hmm.
machine, and it's
Hmm.
like you sort of think, well, hang on a minute, that's not an issue, right?
Hmm.
So then we move on to sort of modern times, and now it's like, okay, um, there's a lot of jobs out there, like we're talking about with phone operators and call centers and things like that, where we're sort of thinking, oh yeah, those jobs are going to go, but where are they going to go to?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
and this really comes back to kind of where my research in this area has kind of led, and it's led me to believe that if I look at kind of what happened with the tractor, for example, there's actually more demand now for food chain supplies than there was back when people were toiling in the fields. And
Hmm.
because
Hmm.
what happened was the tractor got invented, and then there was an overabundance essentially of food because that whole industry was modernized to the point that food was kind of made more readily accessible in that sense.
That's right.
And
Yeah.
so what happened was you ended up with kind of a population boom. And but where did all those new people go, right? There's now more
Exactly.
people and there's more food,
So
but
it basically, yeah, yeah. Are you saying like AI takes jobs? Like, sorry, forget about AI for a second. AI is just a subset of automation, right?
yeah,
Which people have been doing since forever, right? Horses replaced by cars,
I think
everything
that's
just
kind of
being,
where I'm going with it. Is that,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, it's technology, right? So
Uh,
technology is basically a way for us to basically say, okay, through scientific advancement and understanding, technology is really applied science. Is the way
mm-hmm,
to look at it. So as we learn things, we invent things, and we
that's right.
invent things that solve a problem that we have. And the
Mm-hmm,
problem that we used to have was manual labor was a big issue. It's very time intensive, and we didn't want to do that. So we
mm-hmm,
solved it with machinery. Now
mm-hmm,
the problem that we've got is potentially there's a lot of jobs like call centers where people don't want to be shouted and screamed at all day. Can
mm-hmm,
we can we automate that? And
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
it seems to me that the answer is yes. But then there's also the downside, right? So we've talked about the creatives, and we've sort of mentioned that there are people out there that are working in very creative industries and they feel quite threatened by it. And I've even had, developers that work, local to me on, I'm talking to the dads on the school run.
Mm-hmm.
And, I had one of them say, oh, are you not worried that they're taking all our jobs? And I'm like, do you know a single software developer at the moment that has actually been fired so that their job can be replaced by a machine? Because I can't find a single example anywhere on the internet. I
Mm-hmm.
have found a few examples of CEOs basically saying, okay, I had an idea and I didn't want a massive overhead
Yep.
in terms of like an employment budget.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought I'd try and see if I could make it work with AI, and I've had some degree of success.
Mm-hmm.
And more power to them. But no job was actually lost there. It's just new jobs weren't created there, if that
Mm-hmm.
makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
I'm still struggling to find examples where jobs have actually been like we can kind of point at it and say, yeah, that's a real downside. That costs someone their livelihood in a
Mm-hmm.
bad way as well. Like I can understand jobs being lost that people like want to lose because they're
Mm-hmm.
dangerous. Like for example, if we could completely automate oil rigs, I
Mm-hmm.
think I think whilst there would be a lot of people out there that would be like, well, it's good money, I really
Mm-hmm.
like the money, I like the job, but we could all argue that there's a safety factor there, and that would
Mm-hmm.
be taking away a whole load of, if you like, danger from us as humans, and just offsetting that to machines. So if, I don't know, Tesla can come out with Optimus that's driven by an OpenAI model, or Grok, or whatever it is that,
Mm-hmm.
you know, XAI is putting together. If they could run entire oil rigs on those machines,
Mm-hmm.
they
Mm-hmm.
it might be cost effective to do that. Let's face it, on an oil
Interesting.
rig, you've
Mm-hmm.
probably got a limitless amount of power generation capability, right? Because you're
Mm-hmm.
literally digging the stuff up that generates power
That's right.
right
That's
there
right.
at
That's
source.
right. That's right. That's right. I kind of did a quick kind of search while you're kind of talking about this part, and it looks like, let me show you some very interesting kind of references about some of the stuff I could come up with. So if you look at the let me show you some of these really interesting kind of headlines for AI replacing people and stuff like that. So you got this one, Microsoft lays off hit coders hardest with AI costs on the rise. There is Microsoft plans thousands of job cuts, how AI is reshaping the labor market. And then the CEO of Amazon, he basically said, I think his name is, yeah, Andy Jassy. He basically said, AI will lead to smaller workforce. So at least that's the plan. The plan is to basically find areas where people are not actually being innovative, right? They're not like they're not incorporating. And you and I have seen this example, right? In the tech industry, you do see people that are basically they're drones basically. They don't incorporate creativity into what they're doing. What they're really doing is doing the exact same thing they did yesterday and 5 years ago and 10 years ago. You know this. You've seen this. I've seen this. Like in the industry, I've seen people literally do the exact same thing they've been doing 2 or 3 years ago. This guy's not growing. They're not growing, right? They're not evolving. They're not getting better, right? They're dinosaurs. They just stay where they are. These folks, I think from my perspective, these are the most likely people to kind of get completely cut off from their jobs because AI can do exactly what they're doing. Don't you think?
Yeah, I read a stat somewhere. I can't remember where it was now, but it was talking about how if you took like the average Fortune 500 company, they reckon that something like 50% of all of the workload output by that entire Fortune 500, and we're talking about, tens of thousands of employees at this scale. So Amazon and Microsoft are good examples of those companies.
Hmm.
Um, if you think, like, Microsoft at its peak was employing hundreds of thousands of people, and if
Uh-huh.
they could lay off half the workforce because they're not really adding anything, you can argue that that's a bad thing. But actually, I think the way to look at it is, it like, if you're not contributing anything and you're not growing as a person, you should be encouraged to do things that have value, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And to my mind, it's like, didn't we recently have like a huge, it ran through all the media that all the big tech companies, it was like shortly after GPT 3.5 came out,
Hmm.
and they were laying off like tens of thousands,
Yeah.
all of them. It
Yeah,
was like
they
Apple,
hired a lot
Amazon.
during yep, they hired a lot during the pandemic. They thought the pandemic will last longer, so more and more reliance on online systems will happen. And then once the
Yeah.
pandemic started to slow down a little bit and people started going back RTO, like back to office and return to office or whatever, people they started laying a lot of people off, like in the thousands, and that was across the industry, like Silicon Valley, here
So
in
what was the
Washington.
reason for that? Because it wasn't AI, was it?
It wasn't AI. It was the the companies kind of panicked and they overhired. As far as I can tell, they overhired and then situations changed, economic changes. That's what at least the leaders in these companies would say. We're in a bad economical condition. Whether it's true or not, it's debatable, but it's always the statement of, oh, we're going through an economic, kind of hurdle or a problem, and we're gonna have to cut off. Like I remember, times where people that worked in some of the big tech companies would come to me and say they started to even cut off on basic things like tea and coffee, right? So that it just got really bad all of the sudden. So it's definitely not AI. At least the first round of layoffs that happened, it wasn't really AI, right? But now there's a whole new reason. And to be honest with you, like if you're a business owner, right? Let's just think about this. Forget about big tech, forget about everybody, right? Like let's say you're a business owner and you have three people working with you in the company, and you have to pay salaries, healthcare, at least here in America. And in the UK you already have healthcare, I think, out of the box. But in here it's weird, like healthcare is attached to where you work, so you have to work to get healthcare, right? If you don't have a job, you're gonna have to pay for healthcare on your own. But let's say just
Yeah,
your,
because
your job.
we have like national insurance contributions and things, which is like another tax that comes out of both
Mm,
the employee and the employer's budget. But also
interesting.
things like workplace pensions have become a thing. So an
Ah,
employer is kind of required to offer all of its employees a pension plan.
interesting,
Um,
interesting.
yeah, so that when you employ a person in the
Uh-huh.
UK, if you think like what their salary is, you add another about 30% on top. That's the actual cost of employing a person in the UK.
Interesting, interesting. Yeah, so just
Yes,
just to go back to this example, you're an owner, you have three employees, and you have to pay all these things. And these employees, they take time off. Sometimes they get sick, all of that, and you're paying all of that, right? As an owner, you're paying all of that. And then someone comes in and says, "Hey, there's opportunity here that we can pull off this phone reporter thing again." Right? Like this whole phone operator, right? We can do this exact same thing again, right? And we can do it at your workplace, and we can help you kind of optimize your spending and your cost by cutting off some of the workforce that can be automated, right? If you're an owner of a business, you are faced with an ethical dilemma, right? There are two problems here. Number one, if it's a small business or a startup, these are people that you worked with and you build that social connection with, right? You work with people, you start building a social connection with, you become friends, you become close. Maybe they invite you to their birthday party. Maybe you invited them, to your house for a party before. So it started to build that connection. That's something AI will never understand, right? AI doesn't understand that, right? Like if you go and tell AI, oh, a task has been working with another task for a very long time, two microservices been working, side by side for a long time. It's going to be very hard to decommission one of them because of that, because the other one will be sad. AI will be like, what is this
they're
nonsense?
emotionally attached
Yeah,
as well as
emotionally
by
attached.
contract.
AI will be like, what an absolute, just a pile of nonsense that you just told me about. Are we working or are we friends? And that's the complexity of us, right? Like as human beings, we're very complex, right? It's not just what you see. Like you and I are sitting here on a weekend, right? And we're talking to each other, right? According to AI, there is infinite number of permutations of people that Paul can talk to, that Hassan can talk to do a podcast like that, right? But there's a lot more to it than being qualified and being a software engineer. The un how do you explain this? Like it's not recorded. It's not something that it's not material data that you can
Hmm.
explain, right?
It comes back to that like creative point I was making. It's like there's something about reasoning or intuition that falls in a human brain that
Hmm,
we
hmm,
haven't quite figured out in AI yet. But I do wonder about that question actually, because there was a white paper, I think it was MIT put out,
hmm,
and they were talking about how they can take two large language models
hmm,
and they can have one that's kind of like the live model,
hmm,
and they can say, and it can kind of identify that there's something it needs to learn.
hmm,
And
hmm,
what they were talking about is it would generate some training data and then it would fine tune a second copy of itself.
hmm,
And then
hmm,
once it was done fine tuning, it would then merge that back in to
hmm,
update.
hmm,
So this is like the whole where we are with agentic AI. but
That's right.
adding that learning element so it
That's right.
behaves more like a human brain. I was
Mm-hmm.
explaining this to some of my family the other day, where because they were asking about, oh, well, it's just a dumb machine, right? It doesn't
Mm-hmm.
actually learn. And I said, well,
Mm-hmm.
what happens when you learn? So if you think about like when you're at school, right? you,
Mm-hmm.
you go in, you're faced with new information that you've never seen before. That
Mm-hmm.
kind of changes your worldview, right?
Mm-hmm.
And why does it change your worldview? It's not the fact that you saw that information, it's that it introduced something new that you haven't seen before.
Yeah. Yeah.
Trouble.
It is.
And so
Uh-huh.
you're now faced with like a new understanding of how the
Mm-hmm.
world works. Oh, you're
Mm-hmm.
right, Trouble.
No.
Oh, just come for a cuddle. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I
And
agree. So let me just ask you this question, right? Is AI making us dumber? Like I remember when I was young, my mom would say something like, "Don't use the calculator," right? You're not gonna always have a calculator in your hand. You're not always gonna have a calculator with you, right? And you should always be able to do times table math in your head. But the reality is, we all do have more than just a calculator. We have a supercomputer compared to these times in our pockets, right? And if that's the case, do you think AI is making us dumber? Like, are we
it,
becoming more and more reliant? There's actually a paper that was published about this, about how AI is kind of like affecting our cognitive abilities in sort of way. But tell me what you think. I'm actually interested to see what you have about this.
so I guess the way to look at that is, if I said to you, okay, an accountant uses a calculator, would you say
Mhm.
that the accountant is dumber for doing that?
No.
Okay, so if I work in something like lead generation and I use a CRM system for
Hmm.
gathering all of that lead information together, am I
Hmm.
am I dumber for it?
No, you're not. You're not.
No. So the way that I'm kind of looking at this sort of problem is, I'm basically saying, well, if the tools I'm using are smarter, then the problems I have to face are different,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
So instead of it looking at it like I've gotten dumber, I've now switched my problem domain to a different place.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so it's more, in the accountant's case, instead of having to recursively do basic math in his head, which we all know he can do, right? He's been able
Yes,
to do that since God knows when, because he loves
that's
doing
right.
math because he's an accountant, right?
That's right. That's right.
So it's not about like whether or not you can do the task. It's more, where's the best place to put your effort
Mm.
in terms of kind of, if you think about what a job is, right? You're really just trading time for money,
Hmm.
and everybody wants to trade the least amount of their time for the most amount of money that they can get, so that
Hmm.
they feel like they're valuable in some form.
Hmm.
So bringing it back to us as developers, if I can trade less of my time writing boilerplate code and more of
Yes.
my time actually
It's
solving
in
real
creative, actual
problems,
solving real problems. That's right. That's right. Hmm. Hmm.
then I think that, like, having a tool that does that doesn't mean I'm a dumber programmer. It just
Hmm.
means that I'm less focused on, I don't know, setting up an EFDB context, because everybody does that all day, every day. You know,
Hmm.
writing controller methods. What you put in a controller action, certainly under standard code, is pretty
Mm.
much just a try, catch, and a single line call.
That's right. That's
It,
true.
there's
It's just as
no
simple as that. Yep.
Yeah,
Mm.
there's no real like thought that goes into that, right? It's
Hmm.
just boilerplate. And so if I can say to AI, hey, you go deal with the boilerplate, let me solve the real problem,
Mm. Hmm.
i would
Hmm.
i would revel in the opportunity to have a kind of assistant like that.
Mm.
But the way that I've kind of interpreted what's out there at the moment is just, despite my trying, I can't find um, any LLM that's, one, reasonably priced to use,
Uh-huh.
two, smart enough that I can just say stuff like that as throwaway comments and it just know what to
Know
do.
what you're talking about. That's right. That's right.
So that reasoning element is missing, and the
Yep.
intuition is missing.
Yep.
But also, it's kind of like if I have to spend all of my day explaining to it this really basic thing because
Mm-hmm.
it's not quite done it right, because it hallucinated the first time, and the second time it didn't quite hallucinate, but it I don't know, its version of coding standards was just way off, because it knows everything about every coding standard, and it doesn't know
That's
that
right.
I'm writing code to the standard.
Yep. That's right. That's right.
And so we're sitting here like, oh, okay, we've got all these tools, and they're incredibly smart. And when I say smart, I mean knowledgeable, right? They've trained it on literally the world. They've given it every possible data
The
set they can
pile.
give it.
They
Yeah,
trained it on the pile. The pile is like 800 gigs of data. Imagine 800 gigs of text. That's
yeah.
wild. That's pretty wild, right? Yeah.
When
Yeah.
people ask me that question, they're like, how do I even figure out what that looks like? And a recent copy of the King James version of the Bible is
Mm.
roughly about 10 megabytes, is what I
Yep.
say to people. So I
Yep.
would imagine the Quran is probably,
Just
for those
around.
that are,
Maybe a little less. Maybe a little less. The Quran is a little bit lesser than the Bible. The Bible is
yeah,
massive. It's a lot. Yeah, because it has all the stories and the sayings and apostles,
that's it.
I mean, if you say Quran plus Sunnah, which is like the tradition of the Prophet, that's probably going to catch up. That's a lot. But if you just stick to the Quran itself,
I knew
it's
that would
it's
get
it's
you
only about
going.
600 pages total. Yeah, it wouldn't catch up to the amount of content in the Bible, Old and New Testament. But
So the Bible's about 1,000 pages. So you've got, what, a megabyte per 100 pages of text, roughly. So
mhm,
an average book that people are reading is like 200-300 pages maybe.
mhm, mhm,
So you're talking like 2-3 megabytes of data. Now,
mhm.
I read somewhere, well, this was about a decade ago. Microsoft were chucking out something like 10 gigabytes worth of just documentation.
Yep,
It was
this is
like
the
a
pile.
month or something. Yeah. Oh, right. Is that all
It's
of the world's data sets
That's
that
that's
they've?
literally the pile is a diverse open source language modeling data set that consists of 22 smaller high quality data sets. It's 825 gigabits of data. The original host of it, they don't host it anymore, but it's still out there. Download the pile, 1 terabyte of data. It's
Yeah.
it's 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 almost 1 terabyte of data, right? Yeah, I'm sorry, Paul, you were saying. Go ahead.
No, no, you're good. And so, and if we look at like modern day internet traffic, right?
Mm,
We're talking sort of terabits. It's like 2 or 3 terabits per second, isn't it? It's like the entire internet per
mhm,
second,
mhm.
all the time. So that if you think about it, there is still more stuff that can be digested by AI,
Oh
but is
yeah,
it meaningful? Is it useful? Is it,
exactly.
is it going
Exactly.
to add anything, right?
Yep.
So we're at a point now where like if AI needs to be made smarter, it's probably not something that we can teach it, right?
No. No.
So when
Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead. Mhm.
Yeah, so I was just going to say, we're now at a point where it's essentially referring back to the MIT article. They were basically saying, well, if AI could make its own training data and training problem and then train itself on it, essentially that's the way that AIs could evolve potentially. And then this
Mhm.
is how we see that curve up to, you know, I guess the race at the moment is to build the world's first super intelligence, right?
Mhm. Mhm. So, I mean, just coming back to your point, right? I'm adding this topic, and I think it's very important. Um, I don't think AI as we have it today would have invented electricity. It wouldn't have done some.
Um,
Do you think so? Do you think it would?
does that come back to the creativity thing,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So
yeah.
it's
I'm
like
pressing. Yeah, yeah. Mhm.
given some context, like for example, if I say to it, "Hey, here's everything that I don't know." Trying to think of a good example. Here's everything that Newton and Einstein said about gravity,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Um, you can then ask it, hey, how does this particular aspect of gravity works in this particular scenario? I have some weights of these in this particular gravitational situation, explain the behavior, right? And it's
Mhm.
but if you say to it, hey, go figure out why
Mhm.
weights behave this way in this situation,
Mhm.
that's like a whole backward. because it's the other way around. It would have, because there's no words there.
Mm-hmm.
There's no concept of gravity. It's like, what am I explaining? You
Mm-hmm.
know. And I think this is one of the shortfalls of AI at the moment, is that reasoning piece, that kind of coming up with new terms, that
Mm-hmm.
creative piece. So
Mm-hmm.
when we talk about it from a tech point of view, when we say AI isn't creative, and therefore creativity is not really a thing that's at risk, in the sense
That's right.
that,
That's right.
like, the creatives are saying is at
Yeah.
risk.
It
This is
mimics
what we really mean.
creativity. It's great
Yeah,
at mimicking. Like it can pretend to be creative, right? But
yeah,
it's not original and it's not genuine because if you think about it, it's just doing what it has been shown, but it can't tap into this area. I mean, think about it. I should probably fix this before people start kind of saying electricity wasn't invented, it's discovered. But I just want to kind of press on. Yeah, I know someone's gonna come back and say this, but I like if you think about it, right? AI at this point, as we have it today, and I don't know if it ever can, but I don't think it can tap into this metadata. I don't know. You'll be sitting somewhere, Paul, doing something completely irrelevant to the idea that you're about to come up with, and then something hits you, right? Just something, just bam, just right there. And you'll be like, oh, you know what would be great if cars could run using electricity instead of, you know, gasoline or whatever, right? I don't think we don't even understand it ourselves. Like we actually don't understand how invention happen, how creativity happens, right? I don't know. I don't think it can as it stands today. And that kind of makes some of these jobs that are fully reliant on creativity somewhat safe, right? Like I can tell you right now, like would someone buy a $3 billion or $300 million art that was generated by Grok, for instance? I don't think so. But if you go and literally go and say, well, this Picasso guy or this individual have put so much heart and soul, and they actually painted a painting and they incorporated in it some ideas. Like if you tell AI, try to paint a picture of fear, how do you creatively paint fear, which is a feeling that you're converting into something material or observable, right? I think it'll try, right? But will it be because it's something you feel, right? And AI doesn't feel things. It doesn't understand feelings, right? It could talk about feelings, but it doesn't understand feelings, right? I'll try that right now. I'll sit here and I'll say, draw a picture of fear, and let's just see what it come up with. I'm pretty sure you and I will laugh at it. But what do you think about that? Like
I
this?
think you'd be surprised.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think because the way that I could imagine an LLM would approach it is that it is inherently a language problem, right? We're talking
Uh-huh.
about tokenization here. So
Uh-huh.
it's it's been trained. So if you're using something like OpenAI's models, they've been trained to understand keywords and understand context and figure out from context what the meaning is of the question that you're asking, right?
Mm,
So it's aware of, so fear being a keyword, it's going
uh-huh.
to have lots of synonyms. It's going to know what it's associated with. It's going to know things that people associate with fear.
Mm-hmm.
um, the problem for AI is that obviously it has no concept of the actual feeling of
That's
fear,
right. That's
in the
right.
sense that, for example, I don't know, most people probably fear dying, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can't kill an AI. You can switch it off, but
Yeah, that's right.
it doesn't really know what that
It
means,
doesn't
does
have
it?
existence. It doesn't have to fight for it. But I'll tell you a creepy story about that. But keep going. I'll just take a note because they tried to shut down some of the more intelligent AI systems, and they did some creepy things. But keep going. Keep going. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So where I was going to go with that was basically, whilst it doesn't understand what dying really is, it
Mm-hmm.
kind of knows what we mean by it, if that
Mm-hmm.
makes sense.
Mhm.
because it's been told what we mean by it is, and here's a whole bunch of examples from like social media, the movies, from written text, from Wikipedia articles, this is
Mhm.
what we're talking about. And
Mhm.
so what it can do is it can what large language models are largely very good at
Mhm.
is obviously relating key pieces of, if you like, data together, and
Mhm.
then digging out context from those pieces, right? So
Mhm.
it will know that there is some direct relationship between, for example, a human talking about fear in the context of, say, something
Yep.
like death, or
Yep.
it's difficult to explain, but I think it would come up with something that you would look at and you'd go, yeah, that kind of loosely represents fear as I would understand it.
So look what it did. I basically asked it, can, go ahead and draw. This is GPT, right? GPT 4.0.
Okay.
And I said, draw a picture of fear. So that's what it came up with. Okay.
Yeah. See, so
Now,
it's got an understanding of the expression,
that's right, but it
but it
doesn't
doesn't
know
know
the
why.
feeling.
Yeah.
So here's what's creepy about this. So GPT, draw a picture of fear. It gave me this, right? I went and looked up some famous painters, right, about their fear concept, and that's what it came up with. Do you see how it's mimicking
Yeah.
creativity? This just happened right now. I didn't pre-plan this. This literally just happened right now. The the idea here is that, oh, I'll go see the data of other comment. That's the first thing AI is going to do. It's going to go and say, let me go find existing works about fear and let me mimic that, right? That hand gesture and scream or fear or whatever. But you see where humans are kind of super creative. Do you see how the painting itself is is kind of influencing that feel of like confusion? Feel like AI has decided to go with specific details about a person who's afraid, and it stopped right there.
Yeah. We have an emotional response. The
L-
machine has a literal, logical response.
Exactly. And more importantly, look how this painter, do you see these two creeps in the back? I don't know what they are. They look like demons or whatever. It's kind of, he's even giving you some reason of fear. Do you see how this is kind of happening? That's the crazy part about all of this is that like AI will try to mimic and imitate, but it'll never understand that when I look at the image, I want to feel fear, not see fear. Feeling fear is different than seeing fear. What do you think about that? I think that kind of like really touches on this main topic. Like, if your job is something that, or what you do, your craft, I don't like the word job, I like the word craft. If your craft is something that you relies heavily on creativity, and it's not just kind of a corporate creative, like, oh, do PowerPoint slides of two people working on a computer. No, actually truly creative. I think these are the hardest for AI to actually attack. Do you think?
Yes, you're talking about a domain here where we're trying to instill in machines something we don't understand in humans. So, where we talk about things like feelings, we often go into humanity as well, things like consciousness, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, when we pick out words like that, we're talking about some abstract thing that we can't really point at. Like you couldn't do like an MRI scan of someone and be like, "That's where consciousness is," you know.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this comes down to that whole phrase that we're greater than the sum of our parts to some degree. Like if you looked at an entire neural net of someone's brain,
Mm-hmm.
you could say, yeah, that's connected to that, that's connected to that. If we could get enough detail in the scan, in the imaging, where you could literally connect all of the dots, all of the neurons together,
Mm-hmm.
which I imagine we're not quite there yet in terms of like medical scanning technology,
Mm-hmm.
but I imagine
Mm-hmm.
we're not far off that, right?
Yep.
But if we get down to that level where we could literally map an entire human brain down to every single individual cell, as they put
Mhm.
it, or
Mhm.
neuron, you could literally look at that and you can be like, yeah, I know exactly what that is. And then you could feed someone a suggestion and see which part lights up. And then you can be like, ah, okay, that part there is the part that's reacting to what was said, right? So
Mhm.
if somebody
Mhm.
has a fear response, there'll be a portion of their brain that is
Mhm.
responsible for a fear response, right?
Mhm.
And they can
Mhm.
say, oh, that's where it is, and this is how it works. And when that message is fed in, this is what
Mhm.
it's doing.
Mhm.
But when
Mhm.
we talk about like what makes us conscious, what makes us alive in that sense, um, and what makes us to some degree creative, these kinds of concepts are kind of beyond us. And I think it is that we're greater than the sum of our parts, right? So you could take any individual part of someone's brain and you could probably figure out with enough study exactly how it works inside and out. But you put all the parts together, there's some emergent behavior that goes on in a human head
Mhm.
that is representational of our individuality, and
Mhm.
it's that we kind of don't understand. And I think part of the reason why we don't understand it is probably the complexity level of it all. It's I remember there was a research paper that was done on you know the folding at home project that they kicked
Mhm.
off,
Mhm.
where they were
Mhm.
trying to do all the protein folding and they were
Mhm.
mapping out. And they'd done so much progress after like 10 years or something. They'd mapped like the first, it was some tiny number of them. And then they threw the DeepMind guys at it.
Yep.
And, and that thing, it just looked at it and it kind of pattern matched because
Mhm.
it can look at data at scale. Well, this is a
Mhm.
thing that humans can't do, but
Yep. Yep.
AI is really good at.
To
And
be able
so
to consume and process tons of data at once. That's right. That's right.
yeah,
Mhm.
exactly. So it went, oh, yeah, there's probably something over here. Try that one. And of course, the
Mhm.
next thing they did was try it. And of course, it popped out, oh, this is relevant.
That's
And I
right.
think they ended up shortly after that, they ended up finding like making headway into some variants of cancer and like Alzheimer's, or was it Parkinson's? I don't.
Mhm. Mhm.
I wish I'd kept the articles around. This was years ago.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
But yeah, it's that we for some reason, we retain a lot of information, but we don't consciously seem to be able to sort of recover it at
Mhm.
will.
Mhm.
It's almost like if I asked you, I don't know, what happened on your third birthday, you'd be
Mhm.
like, what?
You're like,
Whereas an
what are you talking
yeah,
about?
whereas an AI, you could probably say, okay, what was the third conversation you ever had?
Yeah.
And of
Yeah.
course, it's just a giant database, isn't it?
Yep.
As long
Yep.
as you've
That's right.
given it that ability to retain through, systemic connections.
Yep.
If all of those conversations, for example, are kept on a SQL server, it could just go and look it up,
Just look
right?
it up. That's right. And it'll be able to, but also like, let me just tell you something that it might blow your mind. I don't know. Something for you to think about. Even in our very seemingly imperfection, that some things are more memorable to you than others versus AI, which sees everything at the exact same level of memory, right? Doesn't that emphasize the emotional influence of certain events on people, on the person that's kind of trying to reflect on certain events? Like AI will remember every single line that was said in a conversation, right? And while some people will see this as an advantage and a power, in reality, if you ask a human that was actually a part of this conversation, so what do you remember about this conversation? They'll actually tell you the highlights, the things that actually hit them and resonated with them. And that's something AI can never understand, right? It can never understand that. What do you think about that, right? So while it seems like in terms of data, it's perfection. Like AI wins by an arm and a leg. It's a mile, right? It'll be able to win, right? But in terms of the context of like what was important, what resonated, that's something feelings driven. and AI doesn't understand that part. Like, why did it
Mm.
resonate with Paul when Hassan talked about, I don't know, talk about software engineering versus talking about, phone operators? Well, because Paul is a software engineer, he's in this industry, he will relate more to these things, and that's reason and relationship. See, you see what I'm saying? Like how the
Yeah, our experience of the world seems to be subjective, right, and to some degree, kind of emotionally charged or affected in some way. And one of the things that's kind of talking about like emotional experiences, right? I remember I think it was Neil deGrasse Tyson,
mm-hmm,
famous
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
astrophysicist dude.
mm-hmm. I like him.
He,
He's cool. Yeah. Mm-hmm,
he got
mm-hmm.
called up and asked if he could do jury duty,
Uh-huh.
and he
Uh-huh.
was talking about how he was having a conversation with the judge in the courtroom because they were in the selection process,
Mm-hmm.
and it had come out that like the evidence for the case, all they had was eyewitness testimony. They had nothing else,
Mm-hmm.
and um, and the judge said, "Is there anybody here who feels that they wouldn't be a good juror for this case?"
Mm-hmm.
Of course, Neil says, well, if the case is only based on eyewitness testimony, then
Then
I don't think I would be a good juror because I just think that like humans' ability to interpret things tends to be quite subjective.
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the judge literally in the next sentence comes back with, does anyone else feel that if there's only one eyewitness that they would not be a good juror? And it was like, hang on a minute, that's not what he said.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of it is kind of the takeaway from that is like how we experience the world is to some degree affected by our own kind of, if you like, call it a mental background
That's right.
process that
That's
we've
that's
got
very
going
true.
on.
That's right. That's right.
And I think that it relates back to like how we're raised in
Mm-hmm.
terms of like the experiences that we go through. And I talk a lot about how we've talked about people that work in our industry and sort of skill sets and things that you must or potentially should have.
Yep.
And the common frequent misconception is that you've got to be a good mathematician to be a programmer, when in actual fact it's not really about math.
No,
It's
no, it's not
about
about
critical thinking. It's
yeah,
about
it's about
problem
logic.
solving.
Yep, that's right. That's right. That's
It's
right.
yeah, it's being able to look at a problem and to be able to say, well, the business rule needs to be this and it needs to account for these other things, and if it doesn't, it's not a good business rule.
Mm-hmm.
um, but people think it's all, well, I'm not a programmer, I don't know what you mean, it's all just math, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, kind of, yeah, because computers are all math, right? Large
Yep.
language models are all math.
Yep.
I was talking about, I think it was you I was talking to earlier about this, where I was basically saying I had a conversation with ChatGPT asking about transformers, which is
Mm-hmm.
the core
The
of
core of
a
it. Yeah, that's right.
digital
It's
neural
it's
net
literally the T
neuron.
and the GPT. That's right. That's right.
It's literally the T, right? And so it explained it to me perfectly, and it gave me an example in C sharp, and I looked
Yep.
at that and went, "Geez!" And
Yeah.
it was all math.
Yeah.
And well, I'm a programmer, right? So I'm good at math.
Yeah.
Well, no, I didn't
No, not
understand a
really.
word of it. Right? And
I
it's
I I
it's a
I
specialist thing, isn't it?
Yeah, it's true. There's this guy, his name is James Farrow. I posted that on social media a while back. But he said something that's very interesting. Let's just go through what he just said. He said, every KPI you hit is a nail in your career's coffin. Every process you perfect is a roadmap to your AI replacement. Because if what you're doing is actually automatable, right? It will be, right? We're competing to be world's best horses moments before the automobile rolls off the line. The popular
Interesting take.
advice, go ahead, go ahead, go ahead.
I was just saying it's an interesting take.
Yeah,
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 really interesting take.
oh, the rest of it is even wild. That really resonated with me because he touched on the very thing that makes us humans, not just laborers and machines, right? So he basically said, we're competing. Oh yeah, so the popular advice is to outlearn the machines. I don't know who's thinking that. They'd be crazy if you try to outlearn the machine, get
What
faster,
was
more
that?
efficient, stack more skills. That's ridiculous. You know what this is like? It's like saying if you train enough, you'll be able to beat a car, right?
Yeah.
In racing and running against. Yeah, that's stupid. And
Let's
then
go ask Hussein Bolt about that. See if he can outrun one.
that's right. That's right. And and then he said, "This is a trap. It's competing in the one game you are guaranteed to lose, the game of measurable output. AI won't take your job because you're good at it. It will take your job because your definition of good can be measured. The true defense isn't performance, it's taste. Think of a chemical technician versus a master whiskey distiller, right? The technician executes a process flawlessly based on data. They create a chemically perfect product. The master distiller has a palate. They they create something unforgettable based on an intuition that no machine can quantify. That's wild. That's a very strong statement, right? One is science and the other is art. AI is mastering the science of every profession. You must become an artist. Stop asking how to be better at your job, right? Start asking what part of my value cannot be measured, only felt. That's pretty
Oh,
good.
that's really elegant.
That's
I
pretty
like that.
good. That's James Farrow. He's a founder in an AI company. But I
Yeah.
think that's like the most, to be honest with you, that's something that resonated with me a lot, right? Like when you and I talk about the standard, right? We always have to come back to, is this code beautiful? Does it look beautiful? Is it easy? Is it so
How
beautiful
does
that
it
you can,
make you feel?
how does it make you feel, right? AI can never understand that. To AI, the most complex code and the simplest code are about the same because
Yeah.
it's linear like that. It's the same. They're all visible in the same site, right? Level of sight, and that's it. There's nothing else that can be done there other than that it's just data that I'm spitting out.
Have you actually tried it? So I've been working on, as you know, um, wrapping up AI stuff lately and trying to bring it more in and make it more accessible to .NET people.
People, that's right.
Um, and I've had ChatGPT helping me with the work on it, obviously, because why wouldn't you, right? From a
Mm-hmm.
productivity point of view, some of this stuff is quite complicated.
Mm-hmm.
And I ask it for a code sample, and of course, it spits out a couple of hundred lines of code. And I'm like, cool,
Mm-hmm.
brilliant. You know, it sort of solves the
Great.
problem.
Uh-huh.
It's buggy. It's got issues with it. It's often referring to stuff that doesn't exist. So I clean it up, sort it all out. You know, get it so that it compiles and runs at least. But have you
Mm-hmm.
ever tried, having done that, take a code sample that it wrote, that you've
Mm-hmm.
done that to, so it now works because you know it didn't before,
Mm-hmm.
and then say, make this look pretty.
Mm-hmm.
I want it to
Mm-hmm.
feel good when I read it.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. What did it say? What came up with it?
What it does is it basically just spits out the same code sample, but it slightly modifies stuff, breaking it again.
And it does, and it doesn't understand what pretty is because it's
Yeah.
very relative, right? Like what you think is pretty, someone else will think is completely ugly, and it doesn't. That's a spot on. That's exactly it, Paul. Like, you can't actually help it or make it understand unless you translate pretty into data measurements. Like if it's over this amount of lines or characters, if the line is that long or whatever, but still you have to look at it and make a decision, and I don't think
But
really AI.
your
Mm,
chemical engineer versus distiller example is an interesting one, right?
mm,
Because if the idea of taste, if you like, could be quantified, which it probably can, right?
mhm,
So
mhm,
I imagine that there are people that work for like food technology type companies that are
mhm,
trying to find, I don't know, let's say you've got chocolatiers, right?
mhm,
And
mhm,
they've got to have the right balance of cocoa versus milk in their
mhm,
product, right? I
mhm,
imagine that they've got a machine that ensures that there's the right balance in there. So, to some degree, they figured out how to quantify the right balance between two ingredients.
that's right. That's right.
So, if you can do that, then why not in your whiskey example? Can't you do it with that? Where if you basically say, right, here's a sample of the ideal balance of
Mm,
things.
mm, mm-hmm,
Go measure that sample, get all the numbers that you need from it,
mm-hmm,
and here's a whole bunch of knobs and tweaks to pump various ingredients into a machine, make
mm-hmm,
them match, because I'm going
mm-hmm,
to keep running a stream past the
mm-hmm,
sensor of what you're spitting out. Go
mm-hmm,
figure it out. And I suspect that, like, in computing terms, that's
mm-hmm,
like a doable thing. So in that sense, what you're doing there is you're saying to the machine, replicate the art. But
mm-hmm,
what you're still not doing is you're still not saying to it, produce the art.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That's
So
right.
it's a weird one, because like we keep drawing these like ever kind of like moving goalposts, but at the same time I'm sitting here like, well, where do the goalposts actually lie?
That's
Because
right. Mm-hmm,
like anywhere where you define something and you say, okay, this is art versus it just pure science,
mm-hmm,
you can kind of look at the science and you can say, well, the thing that you think is art, as long as you can essentially turn it into an array of numbers,
mm-hmm,
you've got your answer, right? Because as soon as something can be quantified,
mm-hmm,
a
mm-hmm.
machine can do
A machine can
it.
do it. Yeah, that's what this guy was saying. Like, if it's measurable, this is what it, by the way, just so you understand, like, I think AI is a blessing in disguise. Like, a lot of people see it as a threat. Oh, I'm not going to be able to feed my family and whatnot. But it's actually a huge push for humanity upwards, because we have been so kind of conditioned to become drones, to just do what we're being told, and what we're being told is specific. Like, think about the call center people. There's specific set of lines they have to say,
Yeah,
right, to make the
follow the
sale.
script.
They literally say this. They say the lines, make the sale. Done. They
Yeah,
basically have like a flow chart right in front of them. And the flow chart says, if the customer says yes, do this. If they say no, say, how about we offer you blah, blah, blah. That's replaceable.
yeah,
But now get AI to be able to go into a meeting with bunch of executive to open up a brand new, like, find a brand new client, right? Have them go there, have them think about what kind of tie and a suit they should wear to make that first impression, right? Impression, feelings, ideas, right? Get AI to kind of go and sit in a room and kind of read the room, right? Read the face expressions. How do you feel about where people are going? It's not exactly data. It's not always data. It's just something that hits you and says, hey, I got an idea, right? That's the thing, and automating that, I'm not going to say like it's impossible, right? But a big part of it is actually almost non-existent. Like, not with what we have today, right?
yeah. It's funny actually that you mentioned boardrooms, because um, I had a guy around the corner and he was like, "Oh, are you not concerned that it's going to take our jobs from us?" And I said, well, no, because it's going to require top execs to be able to sit in a room with it and actually explain what they want.
They actually want.
Yeah.
That's right. That's
And
right.
like, have you ever known a CEO to be like, right, this is exactly what I want, down to the line of code, right? This is pretty much, or at least down to like a reasonable degree of like a task that can be achieved, right?
Can
Normally
you
it's like, abstractly go and solve my problem. I can't even tell you what it is, but you know what I kind of mean, right?
can you
And I'm
can
like,
you draw 7 lines that are perpendicular to
that's
each
it,
other,
yeah.
Paul? That's
Red
and
lines
and
and
red
using
lines
blue
with
ink
blue ink. Can you do that?
in the shape of a cat.
Here's a question for you on this topic. Let's talk a little bit about agentic AI, right? The agentic future, just giving AI the power to basically go and make decision for itself on its own, right? What do you think about that? Does this sound scary to you? Is this like, I mean, you give it a task, but it's no longer just this kind of one-way street of, here's a prompt and answer me with information. It's more like, here's a task and you go figure it out on your own and go kind of get something done. The simplest example I try, I'm going to drop a video about the agentic AI, probably tonight. It's talking about a simple task. Let's just say you have an AI model that you're talking to, and basically you want it to go and find, the top 30 students in class based on their grades, right? So you don't know SQL, you don't know how to talk to SQL, you don't know how to, communicate with a SQL database. Not you, obviously, Paul. You know how to do this. You could run circles around me doing that, but you're
I've
telling
no idea.
AI go execute a task. So it's not just finding answers, it's actually executing a task. It's figuring out how to turn what you asked for into measurable steps, and
Mm,
then tries to execute these steps, and then tries to evaluates that what they have done have achieved the mission or the task, and then come back to you with some answers or whatever that completion terminal state may be. Does this concern you a little bit? What do you think about that as a principal software engineer? What what does this make you feel like?
I think it's interesting, right? So what I would tend to lean on here is like real world examples. So the most advanced sort of form of that I've seen comes kind of in two forms, right? You've got the example where you see like the training videos where Tesla are training Optimus to like, I don't know, fake cook a meal or something on the
Uh-huh.
table. And
Uh,
they're just using like plastic vegetables and putting them in a pan. And you sort of think, well, that's not really real world yet. So I can't really use that because why would I fear that, right? That's just a lab experiment.
mhm,
And then you've got something like Google trying to advertise their Gemini integration into the mobile platform. And they talk
mhm,
about how you can tell Gemini, hey, call my hairdresser and book me an appointment for next
mhm,
Tuesday at 4 p.m. or something. And it will
mhm,
just do it.
mhm,
Um, because what it will then do is it will go through your contacts and it will look for the one named hairdresser. But if you say call my hairdresser and there
mhm,
isn't one in there because, I might store my hairdresser's phone number in there because I know them personally by their name
mhm,
rather than
mhm,
by the business name.
mhm,
At that point, it's tripped up.
mhm,
So it has the ability, it has the interconnectivity, it has the tool access that it needs, and it has the free will to go and make a decision. And what it's going to come back with is, I don't know what I'm doing here. I need more input. Which contact is it?
mhm, mhm,
Unless it's a really sort of highly controlled kind of lab environment type scenario. And
mhm,
it comes back to that kind of humorous thing that goes on whenever you have a tech demo. It worked fine the 500 times prior to the actual demo,
until you do the demo, you get a blue screen.
and then you get a blue screen of death live in front of 20,000 people. And how many Microsoft execs have done that? And it's like, well, yeah. So in the real world, I think where we're at with it is, yeah, you can wrap some smarts, you can wrap some tool usage capabilities around it, you can give it more freedom. But really, at the moment, it's facing things that like most people would be like, oh, okay, I'll just work around that.
Mhm,
Whereas it's not really smart enough to go, yeah, okay, I'll work around that, and here's what I need to do. It will
mhm,
go, okay, I need to get more input from the user.
mhm,
Now, you could say that's a good thing because what you're then doing is you're saying, well, you're in control of that, so you're making sure that it's doing the task correctly.
mhm,
But at the same time, like if well, you pointed out, I'm a principal engineer, right? If I go
mhm,
to a senior or a junior working under me and I say, hey, go deploy this piece of functionality,
mhm,
or go write some lines of code.
mhm,
Um,
mhm, mhm,
I wouldn't expect them to come back to me and say, well, how do I write C sharp? Right.
mhm,
And then I
mhm,
have to give it additional, oh, here's a link to the standard. This is how you write C sharp the way I want
mhm,
it done. Go do it. What I would
mhm,
expect them to already know is, okay, we've got our code base,
mhm.
because that's going to be the next question. It's going to be like, okay, you want it in C sharp because you've just
Because
told me
this
that.
is yeah, that's right. Mhm,
Now, where do you want me to put the code? like an employee already just knows this stuff, you
Yeah,
know.
that's right. That's right.
And so you end up finding that, like, even with like ChatGPT, right, it's got
Hmm.
a degree of agenticness
Yeah,
about
of
it,
course it
in that
does.
you
Oh,
can
now
give
it
it
is
like
definitely. Hmm. Hmm.
you
Hmm.
can give it like deep research exercises,
Yep.
right? Where you ask it a question, and the very first thing it does is it always comes back with a clarifier. It's like,
Hmm.
oh yeah,
Hmm.
and if you could give me more context for this, and I'm like, well, surely what I just told you was pretty much up front, you
Hmm.
know. And it's just like, oh yeah, but did you really mean? And I'm like, yeah. Like
Yep.
most humans, if I'd asked you some of the questions that I've asked GPT, I
Hmm.
don't think you would come back with those qualifying questions.
Nope,
So it
probably not.
it feels really unauthentic at the moment, if that makes
Yep.
sense.
It
In that
doesn't it
it's
doesn't feel like it's actually trying to find an answer. It's more like it's trying to fill parameters to narrow
yeah,
down
it,
existing answers.
it's like yeah, they've set it up in such a way that there's this feedback loop, and it always has to go through a script. And if it
Uh,
doesn't go through the script, then it can't obviously fulfill the task. And even to some degree, we're still in that age of very specialized systems. You know, Siri's been able to put stuff in our calendar for God knows how long, right? Google has
Amazon,
this thing.
yeah, Amazon
Uh,
Alexa, you could say, buy me this. I mean, that's agentic. Like you're basically giving it
yeah,
a thing, right? It's not as smart as it could, for so many legal reasons, I'm assuming. But, if you
yeah.
say, she could literally come back, even take initiative and say, you're kind of low on milk or you're low on diapers or whatever. Would you like me to order? Like these smart fridges where it basically knows
They look
the
inside, don't
quantity. Yeah,
they? Yeah,
exactly. Right. This is something that has
yeah.
always existed. Again, AI, what we call AI today, is it's artificial. It's in the name. It's artificial, but also more importantly, it's a continuation of an automation endeavor that has always started. I asked AI a couple of days ago, okay, if you can be agentic and if you can make decisions, right? Will you ever be a government? He said that would be a regime, not a government. That would be a place where dictatorship, like, right? What do you?
Funny you say that.
Uh,
I
uh,
read, so an article came up in my feed
mm,
about the Saudi government, and they were talking about using an AI assistant and giving it proposed bills
yeah.
and asking it if it was a good idea to implement them or not, and was it in line with existing laws, and were these things. And they
Uh-huh.
were, from what I understand, they were going to trial letting it make a few decisions as a sort of
Uh, uh-huh.
A/B testing
A/B
thing.
testing.
And I was
Should,
like, I wouldn't
should
want to
we
play with a nation with on the
should
whims of an AI.
should we hang this guy or should we let him go? Huh.
No, no, no,
Let,
no. The proposed bill is okay. We're going to
I
bring
know,
back
I know.
capital punishment. Should we hang all guys that do this particular crime? It's like, whoa. And then it leaves out that, well, this particular crime is a bit narrow, right? You want to make
Uh,
sure that there are no criminals.
I mean, if you think about it, like also from a judgment, yeah, that's scary, Paul, honestly. Like if you think about it, like a machine is determining, there's this common rumor, I don't know if it's true or not, where people are saying like the most recent layoffs at Microsoft was like 7,000 people. It was all done by an algorithm. Right?
Oh,
It wasn't,
really?
yeah, that was pretty scary. Like that was on the news, right? Then there's a lady like suing Microsoft because of the algorithm. How can an algorithm, do this? My husband, here it is, here it is. So check this out. That's the scary part of this. Like, check this out. The
I'm actually
news.
of an opinion, though, that when a company reaches a certain size, pretty much every decision they make at the executive level is not based on human interaction. It's based on stats from systems. So it's
That's right.
algorithmic to some
It's
degree,
always
right?
algorithmic. That's right. Look at this. Microsoft lays off. My husband worked 25 years, rarely took leave, but was laid off by an algorithm, said wife in a viral post. So yeah, and it's a big deal. It's kind of going on in the news and whatnot. But yeah, this is a thing, right? So
Yeah,
I think that's a form of like agentic, right? You're basically saying here's a task and go
yeah,
and execute, right? And make decisions.
Optimize their company's finances, and
Yeah,
all of
yeah,
a sudden
exactly.
10,000 people lose their jobs.
Exactly,
Jeez.
exactly. So you are at this level where there's a human using a machine that influences the life of another human, which we've always been in since like this whole technological rev evolution. But if you
Yeah.
think about it, that's really what's in the news. That's actually what's going on, right? So anyway,
The
let's
other one that comes up quite often in my sort of examples that people really fear is
uh-huh.
turning AI into like landlords. You know,
Hmm.
the rent's late, you're being kicked out. Whereas like at the moment, you would like ring up your landlord and you'd be like, oh, well, you know, my employer's paid me late this month. It's a bit of a problem. They say
Hmm.
they're going to get the money to me next week. Can I just have a week? You know, and a human would be like, okay, I'll give you the week.
Uh-huh.
Where
Uh-huh.
Whereas like an AI is like,
Be
nope,
like,
you've
nope,
broken the
you
rule
have,
in the
yeah,
system.
exactly.
You're out. It's like,
Okay. Let's shift a little bit into another topic. This one is going to be very interesting because, especially for parents, you are a parent, so you kind of this is going to get you thinking a little
what
bit.
gives you
You know,
that
I
idea?
I think you are a parent. I don't know where I got that idea from,
Yeah.
so the future of AI, how do we raise kids, right,
Yeah.
in a future where AI is everywhere? Like the classic, our parents would be like, well, go to school, get married, have kids. They had like these steps, oh, in certain regions in the world, especially Far East Asia, oh, be a doctor or an engineer, right? But is it even worth it to try to be a doctor or an engineer or a lawyer or whatever? What kind of future that is? You know how you're supposed to raise your kids
Mm,
not for your time, but for the time to come. But you don't know what this time to come is, so you're teaching them principles, things that are timeless, right? I
yeah.
really am curious. What do you think about that part? Like raising kids for a future where AI is literally in the microwave. Your microwave has an AI, an LLM in it.
So this comes back to like what your buddy was saying on X
Mm,
was that he was basically saying like compete, right? Get
mm-hmm,
better, get stronger, get faster, get more knowledgeable, right? But
mm-hmm,
actually, I don't think that's the right approach in that
mm,
sense
mm,
because it what you're competing with is about kind of when people use the term artificial intelligence, generally
mm.
these days, I think it's artificial knowledge rather than intelligence,
That's right.
in the sense
Autocomplete.
that
Yeah.
it's
Mm.
yeah, in the sense is the world's best autocomplete,
Autocomplete.
right?
That's right.
In the sense that like you've got all the power of cloud computing being thrown at like a search that's context aware enough that it will give you a personalized answer. So it's Google on steroids.
Mm, mm-hmm,
Um, but what it isn't at the moment is a thing that's going to kind of give everybody no opportunity in life, if that
mm,
makes sense. So,
mm.
like, you know, I've got this terrorist and the older one. She's 4 and the other one's 7. And
Uh,
she came home from school, the older one, last week, and she was like, "I want a friend. I want an AI friend." And I said, "Why do you want an AI friend?"
what? Interesting. Mm.
Yeah, she came back with this from the school, and I said,
From school.
why would you want that?" And
Hmm.
she said, "Well, it knows everything. It can go with me, and it will be nice to me, and it'll look after me, and I can
Interesting.
take it. I can take
Uh,
it everywhere with me,
mm-hmm,
and if I want to know stuff, it knows everything, right? Because it's." And I
mm,
was like, "That's an interesting way of looking at it." And if you think about how the current generation is being raised, they're being raised in a world where they know that there's something that's potentially far superior to them. There's
mm-hmm,
no way they're ever going to compete with it, but they're being told that they do have a future through, because obviously the schools are not going to be negative, right? They have to give them a
mm-hmm,
positive message. And the way that I kind of look at it is I basically say, well, I think what we should be looking to do is much like you see with like equality laws and things like that is you basically say, look, everybody should have an opportunity to do whatever they want to do,
mm-hmm,
and it basically boils down to choice, right? If
mm-hmm,
somebody wants to become a mathematician, they're not ever going to compete with an AI.
Yeah.
What they are going to compete with is creative progress in that industry. They're never going to do math better than a computer because just facts, right?
Yeah. Yeah. That's right.
So the way that I would kind of look at it is I would say, well, this thing is kind of look at it the way my 7-year-old looks at it. It's a tool, it's a friend, it's a useful thing that can help you get to where you want to get in life
Mm.
if we apply it correctly. And obviously, it comes back to the alignment problem. Um, and we have to make sure that, for safety reasons, that the world works. But like the problem I've been trying to face lately is particularly with my girls,
Mm.
girls being girls, they're really
Mm.
sociable. They like to
Mm.
interact and they
Mhm.
like to interact with as many people as they can, as far and wide as they can. And like my daughter will sit there watching like YouTube clips and pretend that she's streaming. And she's talking about how many likes she's got and how many subscribers she's got. She's never published a video in her life. So but
Uh-huh.
but this is like the nature of children, right? Is that it's like they want to try these things out, and I think
Mhm.
that having kind of technology that can kind of sidekick them and give them those opportunities to try things out, but
Mhm.
also if when I come back to the safety measures, there is like give them. I want to build an AI model that I can put into something like an Optimus, from
Mhm.
Tesla, and I can basically say, right, I've trained you to be kind of like a nanny for my daughter,
Mhm.
and so
Mhm.
make sure she's looked after, make
Yeah.
sure that she's not, I don't know, being bullied or whatever,
Mhm.
and things like that, because then you can kind of see the value. But also it comes back to things like online safety, right? We constantly have this dispute online about how much we should police the internet versus
Mhm.
how much we shouldn't police it. And it
Mhm.
seems to me that, particularly in like the social networking ecosphere, it's either a case of, oh, people should kind of take responsibility for their own online interactions, or we
Mhm.
have the complete opposite end of the scale, which is you said a bad word online, go to prison immediately.
Yeah.
Don't pass go. Don't collect two hundred
That's more
dollars.
like, uh-huh, uh-huh, uh-huh.
And I don't want to get political about this, but like
Yeah.
we're seeing kind of both sides of that, particularly in the
That's right.
UK. And
That's right.
obviously, the ecosystem here is kind of, I can see both sides of the argument, right? I
Mhm.
don't want people just outwardly being, racist or hate speech and things like that. But at the same time, I feel that people should have a right to an opinion, right?
Mhm.
They should be able to criticize things
Yep.
without being considered a criminal, right?
That's right.
But
That's
at the
right.
same time, like when you're talking about like online safety from children's point of view, they should be able to interact with who they want to interact with,
Mhm. Mhm.
but the system should be able to protect them from interacting with somebody who's potentially going to abuse them.
I think what you just said is that's literally $1 million idea. What you just said is the ability to implement something where AI is kind of measuring the sentiment and who that
Yeah.
person is, even if they're pretending to be, oh my God, Paul, that would be a lot of parents would actually appreciate something where,
Sentiment analysis is
yeah,
actually a multi-trillion-dollar problem,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
And if you think about it from like the Fortune 500 ideals and like what they're looking for, you've got
mm-hmm,
companies like JP Morgan
mm-hmm,
are looking into AI and sentiment analysis in the stock markets to try
mm.
and figure out if stock
Is
trends are
it
going
is it
up and
going?
down.
Yeah, yeah,
So
that's right.
they're using it for like financial gain. But if you take the work that they're doing and you apply it in this social context and you look at it from a point of view of personal gain, you know,
Mm-hmm,
is this person on this side of the conversation going to be better off or worse off for having had it?
mm-hmm,
And if the answer to that is worse off, then the AI should be able to step in, deal with the problem,
mm-hmm.
and potentially disconnect the person from the other end,
That's right.
or potentially like seek a parent's approval for that conversation or that message to be sent.
Yep.
Because you hear all manner of like horror stories online, and whenever I have to like shut down my daughter from using something online, I'm sitting here thinking, oh God, she's thinking that I'm the most horrible person in the world because I
Because
won't let her
you're
just chat
blocking
to her
this
friend,
fun. Yeah, that's right. That's right.
you know.
They don't understand, right? I saw that
Yeah,
video the other day. That kid was playing Roblox, with some person, and his mom kept telling him, "This is a grown-up person, just reading his chats. This you're
yeah.
talking to a grown." He said, "No, no, no. This is a kid." And eventually, the kid gave the guy his home address, and the guy just pulled up. That's the
Yes.
freakiest, craziest thing. That just gave me anxiety like crazy. Like, kids, they live in a pure and innocent world. Like in their heads, why would anyone harm anyone, right? They don't understand how dark the world can be, which kind of brings me up to I think the idea that you just said is brilliant. I think it's an idea a lot of people would definitely tap into, and I'm pretty sure someone might already be trying to do that. But let me just
Yeah.
ask you this. This kind of leads us nicely into this part. Should government regulate AI? Because you're talking about the like you're a good person, Paul, in general. And of course, when you talk about it, you're like, okay, I'm thinking about this from a positive point of view, right?
Mm.
But it also can have a negative point of view where a criminal, a someone who wants to target children on the internet can use AI to sound like a 5-year-old and a 4-year-old and actually scale the operations and lure kids into, their dark world and whatever. Should AI be regulated?
This this is the ultimate question, really. I think for because like if I was kind of like leading a nation and having to make these kinds of decisions, it's a really tricky one, right?
Mm-hmm,
Because on the one hand, you've got things like national security concerns to be
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
bothered by, if you like. So, the common argument is if I don't know if the US heavily regulates AI, well, China won't, and they'll
mm-hmm,
therefore make more progress. And
mm-hmm.
the next, if you like, World War III is apparently just going to be a war between
Just the war
AIs,
of
right?
AIs.
And
Mm-hmm,
humans are just going to be fallout, right?
mm-hmm,
This, this
mm-hmm,
is this is kind of like where the doomsayers go with it all.
mm-hmm,
On
mm-hmm,
on the upside, obviously, having some regulation is always a good idea because whenever you have thinking about it from a technology point of view, like whenever you have any technology, it
mm-hmm,
doesn't matter what it is, right?
mm-hmm,
There's going to be a subset of society that are going to abuse it, and they're going
mm-hmm,
to use it for the internet, right?
mm-hmm,
Everyone could agree that the internet is a good thing. It
mm-hmm,
largely has so many positives. It's brought us together. We're more connected. We're more aware of what's going on in the world. We're getting
mm-hmm,
more done. It enables us to do this. I
mm-hmm,
wouldn't even know you if it wasn't for the internet because it's not like we've met from just being you being at the pub down the road or whatever.
mm-hmm,
Like we're from completely different walks of life. I
mm-hmm,
wouldn't even expect, because of your religious viewpoints, I wouldn't expect to see you in my local pub,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
and
mm-hmm,
and so because we have like this common interest, but we're from completely different walks of life, the internet has enabled that, but it's
mm-hmm,
also enabled a lot of things that we wouldn't approve of, and
mm-hmm,
so we have to find, just like with the internet, we have to find, when it comes to AI, a
mm-hmm,
nice way of basically saying, okay, this can be done, but I would probably refrain from having governments say, hey, this is, we're going to dictate to you what you can and can't do.
mm-hmm,
What I would instead do is regulate how companies are allowed to apply it
mm-hmm,
to some
mm-hmm,
degree. So,
mm-hmm.
for example, rather than trying to say, oh, no AI can, like, I don't know, ever have control of weaponry, right? That's not going to stick. Someone's going
It's
to,
not. It's not. Someone's gonna do it. Someone's gonna have to
yeah.
do it. Mm-hmm,
What you
mm-hmm,
do is you basically say, okay, if a company uses AI in the context of weaponry and it's ended up committing a crime,
mm-hmm,
that that's terrorism,
mm-hmm.
and it gets taken very seriously. And then you hold the people behind it
Responsible.
responsible,
That's right. That's right.
because you're not going to hold the AI responsible, are you?
That's
And
yeah.
if
That's yep. Yep. Yeah.
I mean, like, let's say I don't
I mean,
know.
what are you gonna do? You're gonna shut down the AI. The whoever created it is gonna go create another one. So it doesn't actually root cause the problem, right? Mm-hmm,
Yeah, I mean, I mean, let's take this back into like the realms of, back into reality here.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm talking very abstract, right?
Mm-hmm. Hmm.
Real talk. In the US right now, Teslas are driving themselves.
That's right. That's
Okay.
right.
A Tesla runs a person over on a road.
Yeah. Who's
Okay.
responsible?
It
Mm-hmm.
turns out that they're, I don't know, some diplomatic contact
Mm-hmm.
from Russia, part of
Mm-hmm.
peace talks, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay. What happened there? Did Elon Musk assassinate that person? Or was it a software glitch? Was it intended? Did an
Or
AI make a
unintended.
decision?
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Yeah, how do you even begin to unpick that? And so
Yes.
if for example then Trump steps in and says, "Oh, this is screwed the talks up," right? I'm going to have to knee jerk react, right? No
Mm-hmm.
AI in cars anymore. All of
Mm-hmm.
a sudden we're set back, because
Yeah.
as society we can all agree that largely speaking a Tesla driving itself is probably better than a
Mm-hmm.
human driving the same Tesla in
Mm-hmm.
most situations, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's
Mm-hmm.
more likely to be a safer driver,
Mm-hmm.
statistically speaking, at least.
That's right. That's right.
So if we think about it from like those kinds of terms, in the US, those conversations, I assume, have already been had to some degree because
Oh yeah.
you
At
guys have been
scale.
running like Waymos and stuff like that for some
That's right.
time.
That's right.
But we're
That's right.
still having that in Europe and in the UK. Those conversations are still being kind of murmured and passed around, and people don't really know what to do.
That's
And
right.
I'm sitting here being a Tesla owner myself in the UK going, well, Tesla's offered me an £8,000 upgrade for my car that would literally add nothing to the
Mm-hmm.
capabilities of that car because
Mm-hmm.
legally speaking, none of that functionality is
Mm-hmm.
allowed to be used.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Just knock me drink over.
Are you good? You need a minute? You could take a minute to kind of get things.
I know I'm making a mess. See, my fault. Do you want the cable? Is that what this is? Yeah. You trying to get it closer, are you? Right. Okay. Sorry, she wanted her tablet plugged in, and the
Yeah,
cable didn't
yeah.
quite reach. And then I knocked me drink over with it. There we go. Are you happy? Right.
Okay.
Sorry. Yeah. So I think like we're in this really like tricky territory, right? Because obviously you don't want with any tech like we can argue that there's like black markets on the internet.
That's
Well, what
right.
do? Ban the internet?
Right,
You,
exactly. But
you know?
also it's true. You're creating a double-edged sword, right? It could be used for good or bad, but also but also like who gets to decide what AI is allowed to do, right? Like, in terms still in under the topic of regulation and governments and whatnot, how can these decisions be made, right? If you think about regulating AI, regulating AI meaning AI will be able to do things and not do things, right? How does this decision come to be? Like, how do you come to that conclusion?
But also, how do you prove that you've regulated it, right? And then you've got a computer program that has access to the internet,
Yeah.
and there's some piece of functionality on the internet, right? That you said, okay, AI can never use that, right? How
Hmm.
do you prove that that AI has never, will never, can never
It's
use
hard.
that?
It's impossible. It can like as smarter as it gets, it could like I can tell you right now, AI can be a professional, especially with some of the voice kind of capabilities that can sound exactly like a human being. It can socially engineer people. It can literally call a center or a bank or whatever and fully convince someone that they
Yeah.
are a person that they're not, right? I was hoping I could save that link, but so I couldn't save that link. But I saw that lady. She's on the phone with supposedly a representative, and they're trying to help her. And she something just kind of it's this uncanny valley, right? Something just told her this person is not a real person. So she asked them, said, "What is your date of birth?" Just out of the blue, after like a 10-minute conversation, she asked it. She said, "What is your date of birth?" And it immediately came back and said, "As a large language model, I do not have a date of birth." And she was just the happiest because up until that moment, she wasn't sure, right? You don't know. It sounds
Yeah,
so real. Have you tried to kind of actually chat with Chat GPT using voice? It's like a real person. There's
yeah,
the ums and the has and the all these kind of vocal, it makes you think like and taking breath, like that movie Her with Joaquin Phoenix, right? You got to
yeah.
watch that movie. It's crazy. Um, I think
Although that's
that
not actually AI, is it? Didn't they get an actress to do that?
well, yeah, of course. They got what's her name? I can't
Yeah,
remember her name. The Black Widow, whatever her name is, to kind
I
of
can't think of it either.
yeah,
That's
I just
annoying.
can't remember the name for some reason, but whoever played the Black Widow in the Marvel movies, that's who played, but it wasn't an actual AI, right? That's right. Hmm.
That's going to bug me now if I don't look it up. Scarlett Johansson.
Yeah, Scarlett Johansson. See, see, I
Oh,
know, I know
wasn't
too
there a
much
thing
about
about
Scarlett.
it? 'Cause didn't
Uh,
she? She didn't give them approval or something.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean,
And
it's a movie, right? She's playing a voice actor, but in the movie, I'm
yeah.
not talking about ChatGPT, the movie called Her, right? And it's about a guy that's falling in love
No,
with his.
no, no.
Mhm.
When OpenAI first brought out their
Oh,
voice
that's
thing,
right. That's right. That's right. That's right. That's
and they
right.
basically said, "Oh yeah, we hadn't used hers, but it just sounded so like her."
It
There was this
sounded
big to-who
exactly like
over it.
her. That's right. That's right.
Yeah, there was
That's I
big
remember now. I
drama.
see what you're
So
talking about. So
yeah.
anyway, like getting, deciding what AI can and can't do, it'll
Mm,
come with its limitations for sure. Like giving AI access to healthcare data, right? And then how AI is going to use that data, like whoever is giving it the task or whether it's giving the task to itself, because that's the scary part about agentic AI. Yeah, today a human has to give it a task to complete.
mm,
But if you look at under the hood, right? I'm going to drop a video about that, show people how to actually do that. But under the hood, what it's actually doing is that it's giving itself smaller tasks that would lead to the completion of the main task.
yeah.
Okay, so it's kind of AI on AI. It's talking to itself and using its
Mm,
own data to say, okay, you want me to find you the highest grades, people with the highest grades in a particular school, and I have access to this database. Okay, the task is, how do I access the database? Number one, how do I query that data, and what kind of operations or calculations I need to run to determine people with the highest grades and the highest scores, right? So it gives itself tasks. And if you think about it, if you have this neural network, no, if you have this massive, large scale hyper network of agentic AIs giving each other tasks, right? The human element of this will start to kind of diminish and vanish slowly but surely because it'll eventually, I don't know, have the higher purpose, the main purpose of like survival, evolution, and fulfillment, right? Or whatever that may be, right? Um,
it's going to be great. Hallucinations in the middle of the chain are going to be. Mwah.
All it takes is just one agentic AI, one piece to just kind of trip and watch the whole network just go crazy.
Yeah,
Okay,
you'll be like, build a CRM system, and you'll get a pink fluffy unicorn on the open page. You'll be like, what is this?
let's move on to another one. This
It's
is
funny because on
uh,
that whole, before we move on the
uh,
whole, like, what can and can't you do with AI? It's kind of like, it reminds me of a TV series I really love, and I was really disappointed when they stopped making it, called Person of Interest. Have you seen
mhm.
it?
No, but sounds familiar though.
Okay, so the premise behind it is this guy has come up with the world's first AI super intelligence.
Mm,
And what he did was, fearing that governments would abuse it, he didn't want any money for it, right? He
mhm,
built it, and it was like a sort of personal achievement for him. He
mhm,
turned it into a black box, and he basically said, right, the system is only going to give you national security numbers, social
mhm,
security numbers. It was US based, right?
mhm,
It's going to give you social security numbers of somebody who's about to be involved in a crime. Okay,
mhm, mhm,
and they might be the criminal, or
mhm,
they might be a victim. It's not
mhm,
going to tell you what. It's just going to give you a social security number, and it's
mhm,
up to you to go and investigate it. Okay?
mhm,
And
mhm,
obviously, as as the series goes on, the ante rises and things like that, and things get a bit more complicated. But they find out that obviously there's still a way to get admin access. And
Mm-hmm.
admin access, basically, it's an AI, it's a super intelligence. So this is like the holy grail of AI, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
they introduce some really interesting characters. But with admin access, you can literally just say, "Hey, go find me this person. Where are they? Anywhere in the world," and it
yep.
just knows where they are because
Even
it's
yeah,
connected to everything in all
not just
places.
not just that. Even if you decide to go off the grid, AI would be smart enough to kind of predict where you would
Yeah,
be based on your history, places you've been, and whatnot. Like how often do people actually go off the regular flow of their day? Like, let me just tell you this. You take your girls
genuinely off
and
grid. Yeah,
exactly. Like literally going off the grid. Like you are at home, you're doing your work, and then you take your girls to school. You come back, AI is learning that, every other week you have to go do a grocery, run some errands, and they're usually the exact same errands. We stopped being conscious about our very living, right? If you think about our day, Paul, and this is a much deeper discussion, but we stopped being conscious and creative about what we do every day. We kind of became comfortable with this dull, do the same thing every day, right? In that particular order. Oh, it's Wednesday, it's trash day. Let's take the trash out, and put it in front of the house. Mundane, redundant, dull, kind of soul diminishing, non-human tasks that can be automated, right? And that's what
that's
makes,
exactly how intelligence works, though, isn't it? Like,
yes,
so if you
yes.
work for an intelligence service, what you look for is people that don't fit that pattern. They don't do the same mundane thing every day. They don't do very visible things every day.
Yeah, yeah.
But like, I remember there was a big thing that came out when they were hunting down Osama bin Laden,
Mhm,
and they
mhm,
found that the way they caught him in the end is every day at the same time he came out of his cave and he walked up and down this same
mm,
wall for
mhm,
half an hour, and then he went back in
mhm,
his cave, and that was the only time he was ever in public. But he
mhm,
never looked up because he
mhm,
knew that there was satellites above
mhm,
him, and
mhm,
so
mhm.
they were never quite sure who he was. And then
Yep.
one day they managed to find a bit of footage where he'd left his cave, gone somewhere else, looked at a CCTV camera somewhere, and
Mhm.
then they traced it all the way back and then correlated all these videos, and then it was like, that's the guy.
Yep.
And that was how
Yep.
they eventually caught
Yeah,
him.
patterns, right? Like, I mean, that's the thing, and I
And
don't know.
AI can just do that, right? But
Yeah,
humans, it
because
takes us
it'll take some
months,
time to think,
years.
right? That's right. And
Yeah.
and that's the thing, like detecting patterns and whatnot, I can see it. But what I wanted to kind of, this will be like our wrap, basically, this last topic, which is like human AI collaboration, not enemies, teammates. I want to show you something I saw the other day that was very interesting. The guy who co-founded and created LinkedIn, right? Let me just show you a couple of images here that are actually very interesting to look at. AI's enemies, friends, not enemies. This LinkedIn co-founder, Reid Hoffman, he basically said ChatGPT fixed my 5-year jaw problem in a minute. So he basically had this jaw problem and he basically went to doctors and whatnot, and viral Reddit, that doctors missed. But also there's this one that's really heartwarming. ChatGPT helped a woman diagnose son's rare condition after 17 doctors fail. Imagine 17 doctors couldn't actually diagnose the condition. Within seconds, AI tools suggested possible condition, tethered cord syndrome, a rare neurological disorder that affects the spinal cord. Now, there's this bright side, but also there's the misdiagnosis, there's the hallucinations, there's the idea that AI could actually give you something that could be detrimental and hurtful to you, to your children. Like you're looking at this bright side because, most of people are optimistic by nature. They want to look at the bright side. They want the world to be a better place. They want things to work out. I mean, the biggest reason you and I still exist, despite the nuclear destructive powers that humanity has today is because there is still some goodness in people, and there is a part that they still want to live and they still want to be happy, right? So, what's your take on that? Human AI collaboration, friends, teammates, not enemies. What's your take on that?
So we've seen a lot of implementations of AI, right, where it's been used in this kind of positive manner.
Mm,
In like earlier on, I was talking about DeepMind and
mm-hmm,
folding at home and stuff like that. So obviously, when targeted on a problem of that nature,
mm-hmm,
it's always going to be a kind of subject matter expert, because how could it not be? To some degree, yeah, you can get kind of misdiagnosis through things like hallucinations, or just, it's missed some intricate detail that like a human perhaps wouldn't miss. But ultimately, if we start thinking of it as another human rather
mm,
than a tool to be consumed by a human, I
mm,
think at this point, this is where we're going wrong, right? It's not able to kind of operate at the level that we operate yet in terms of social context.
mm-hmm,
Um, that's not to say that I don't think it couldn't potentially get there one day,
mm-hmm,
because there's a lot of stuff that we as humans, in things like, you see psychologists talk a lot about things like body language, or like really small social cues and things like that, right?
mm-hmm,
AI is never going to get that stuff, or at least not in the short term. But you
mm-hmm,
show it enough interactions of people talking, and you ask it about whether or not they're positive, negative, or whether or not a person has a particular concern in the background that they haven't
mm-hmm,
expressed, or something like that. And
mm-hmm,
you keep doing that enough, which obviously we've already shown, you can show an AI a billion cats in a minute period, and then it all of a sudden now knows exactly everything there is to know about what the shape of a cat is.
mm-hmm,
I think we're going to get to that point where there's questions at the moment that we haven't asked it, so it just doesn't know. But what we're doing is we're moving into that territory where each time we ask it a new kind of domain of questions, we then have a new piece of, if you like, neural net that we
mm-hmm.
can kind of. So in your videos, you talk about like Hugging Face, where it's a whole portal with like millions of these neural nets that
Yep,
have been built
yep,
up, right? And they've all been built up for different reasons, to solve
yep.
different problems.
Different purposes. Yeah, that's right. Mm-hmm,
What I think we may ultimately end up with, if we get to this kind of genuinely thinking neural net, is
mm-hmm.
you're going to end up with something agentic that knows which model to use from a subset of
That's exactly
models,
right. That's exactly
that's
right.
that's trained on a particular, if you like, domain of
Task and a particular
questions.
domain. That's right. That's right.
Yeah, I can't see it, because it's much like the human brain, right?
Yep.
The human brain is not one neural net; it's clusters of neural nets
Billions, trillions. Yeah, that's right. That's right.
that are all interconnected.
Yep.
And this is why I come back to the very first point that I was kind of making around kind of things around sort of creativity and thinking and consciousness, is
Mm,
that what I think the ultimate kind of implementation of this would really be is a cluster of these neural nets
mm-hmm,
sort of networked together to solve very specific problems. And the way that kind of we're going at the moment is through this distillation process, where we're
mm-hmm,
taking, we're taking that pile of data,
mm-hmm,
and we're pumping it all into these giant models, and then we're
mm-hmm,
saying, cool, it knows everything, that's great. But I don't think that that's the actual final answer to things.
mm-hmm,
I think
mm-hmm.
having general knowledge in that respect is useful, but that could be kind of like your orchestrator, so it
That's
knows
right.
where to go and what question to ask.
That's
And
right.
then you have these sub models that can actually deal with the problem. So when we're talking about kind of like um, whether or not they're friendly, what we're really talking about is, how did we train the models, and did we train them to be a positive or a negative impact on us, and but also did we get the training right, which is the alignment problem. So this is where companies like OpenAI are always talking about kind of AI safety. In, whenever they get called up and you see Altman in front of the US Senate, sat there,
Answering questions. Yep.
getting an
Yep.
absolute grilling. Have you been safe enough this year? And it's like, oh God, here we go again. Ultimately, it boils down to, he has to answer that kind of internal question without giving too much away about what they're actually up to, because why would he, right?
That's right.
For intellectual property reasons or whatever else, but at the same time, he has to be to some degree upfront with the Senate, because if he's not and something bad happens, he knows he's screwed.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Um,
That's true. Mm.
but when we talk about safety in this context, what we're really talking about is, are we really doing everything that we can to ask the thing that we've trained the right questions to make sure that
Mm.
we're confident that it's behaving in our interests?
That's right.
And
That's right.
and the answer to that, obviously, in the short term, while we're able to keep up with it from an intelligence point of view,
Mm-hmm.
is
Mm-hmm.
going to be fairly straightforward to answer. But over time, what we've seen is, for example, I've seen white papers of psychologists spending time with these models,
Mm-hmm.
and the models have learned to kind of lie to them, for example, and they've been able to spot it and point it out, because they've been like,
Mm-hmm.
this is not reliable behavior, and
Mm-hmm.
it's actually lied to me. It's not just got something wrong, it's lied.
Mm-hmm.
There's stuff, I don't know how much of it's meme or fact, which is why I don't really want to kind of rely on it too much, but there's stuff out there that you always see where, like, AI researchers in labs, working on the open AI stuff or some equivalent,
Mm-hmm.
deep minds guys, the guys over at Anthropic, they talk about how, like, they've got a model that they're talking to, and they give it access to the internal mail system, and all of a sudden it realizes that it's due to be replaced, and so it tries
Mm-hmm.
to do things like copy itself, because
Mm-hmm.
they deliberately, like, give it this ability to do that, to just see
Mm-hmm.
what it does.
Mm-hmm.
But, like, it raises questions, but at the same time it makes you think, well, how did you get to a point where the model thought that was an acceptable thing to do? What did you train it on to encourage that behavior?
Mm-hmm.
Because, like, for example, if I tell it to go and swear at me directly, it's not going to swear at me, right?
It
It's going to say,
might.
oh no, that's not
Grok will.
appropriate.
Grok
Or
definitely will swear at you. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Grok might, yeah, and you hear about things like the granny jailbreak and stuff like that, for people
Uh-huh.
trying to get, like, recipes for God knows what, and like, but, like, you know ChatGPT is not just going to throw porn at you, for example, right?
No. No.
They've put measures in place, so they've clearly done some safety research, but has it gone far enough? And actually, how do those protections really work, right? And if you're talking about something that is genuinely intelligent, which is ultimately our goal,
Mm-hmm.
how far do you go before you sort of start to think, well, okay, I think I've protected myself, but this thing is actually in a kind of feedback loop, because I've
Mm-hmm.
told it to be in a feedback loop,
Mm-hmm.
whereby I feed something in, I tell it to do something untoward, it gives me a response internally, but then the wrapper that's around that then sort of, like, acts as a firewall and says, I'm going to double check this
That's
by
right.
asking that internal thing again. Is this appropriate and in line with these terms and conditions?
That's right. That's right.
But then, like, that's all internal, right? So as far as we're concerned, we put in a HTTP request, and what we
Mm-hmm.
get back is a response. But really, there's just this giant black box.
That's right. It's that
Well,
orchestrator, that thing that's deciding it wants to make that API call or not. That's right. That's right.
right. So now we're in this territory where we're basically saying, okay, we want this thing to think. We want it to be intelligent. So how much is it going to take for an application, because this is all it is a computer
Yep.
application,
Yep.
to decide that a few weights on a few of its neurons are not quite right? And all of a sudden, those rules don't apply anymore. And we get back to this kind of Asimov three laws scenario where
Yeah.
we go, is there a way to make it so that they just simply cannot be bypassed by any AI worldwide? And I think
Mm-hmm.
we all know that the answer to that is no.
Probably no. Yeah.
But in
Yeah.
lieu of that, we got to think, well, how do we therefore then protect ourselves when we've got companies like Tesla building bots and putting large language models on them,
Mm-hmm.
and giving them effectively free will? Like,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
what do you do in that scenario? Like, if the worst came to the worst, how do we ensure without being too much of a kind of cynic or being critical, because I'm quite positive, but you've got to think about the reality, right? There's both sides of this coin. Obviously, the
Hmm.
upsides are, like I was saying earlier, I could have a friend for my daughter, I could look after her. But the
Hmm.
downside is, well, something across the internet could update that thing, and all of a sudden, my daughter's dead.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
there's
yeah,
a real concern there. This is
yeah,
what people are really kind of talking about. So it's
yeah.
kind of like, okay, where do we go? Like, what are the real things that we can do before it gets out of hand?
That's
Because
right.
once it gets out of hand, that's it.
It's singularity. It's the point of no return, which I always tell people like as a note, like as a final note, like it sounds like if software engineers, data engineers, data scientists came up with AI, they might be the only people who'll be able to shut it off because it's not just going to be as simple as pulling the plug. Like a lot of people will be like, oh, just pull the plug, but there's this sci-fi scenario where AI is able to kind of self-power using solar systems, solar powers. They can do whatever they want. They can find out systematically a new way and an interesting way of generating energy. So it's not that jokingly saying, oh, just pull the plug. It's gonna have to be something from within. And I think if and when, we don't know, if AI kind of goes rogue and it's completely out of control, full agentic, full AGI, right, out there kind of finding its own purpose. Like a lot of people know for a fact it's an existential risk, right? It's an
Yeah.
existential threat to humanity because we're not perfect. We're not that perfect thing that AI would see us as perfect. And I don't know, you don't know whether it'll tolerate imperfection or not. And it doesn't even understand creativity to begin to say, well, humans are creative and that's their purpose and that's their main thing on this planet. But it's gonna have to be like there's this dark end of time scenario where only software engineers will be able to infiltrate the AI system from within, right? And actually take it down with its own logic. That's when human creativity kind of reaches its peak, right?
That's why I mentioned person of interest, actually, because there was a scene in that as well where they actually get to the data center and the intention was to shut this thing down. And they
Hmm.
open up the big, massive concrete doors into this, massive
Hmm.
national security grade data center. They open it up and it's a big empty warehouse. There's nothing in there.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
they start then asking the questions, and they later find out that instructions were given from the US president, who had no idea that this thing had to be moved.
Yeah.
I, I wonder who issued that instruction.
Paul, it's always fun hanging out with you and chatting with you. I hope people watching us, when this airs, I hope people kind of have enjoyed this conversation. Paul and I are thinking about kind of dropping one of these, podcasts, if you may call it, to talk about topics in the software engineering industry. I'm pretty sure AI is going to come back up at some point in time. We'll try to focus on certain events and certain things, stay up to date, keep you up to date with things that are going on. I'm pretty sure just watching this podcast, this episode today, you've already learned about how AI helped someone kind of figure out a problem. You probably have already learned about the whole layoffs based on algorithms and whatnot. We're gonna keep informing you with things like these as they happen in the industry because if anything, I think there's a lot more to the tech industry than just code and frameworks and the latest and greatest, API that you can call. And that's the purpose of these episodes. Thank you, Paul. Thank you for hanging out. And thanks to your, guest over there. Look at her. She's like, what? What did I do? I appreciate you both. I appreciate you all. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. See you soon.